After the last two races in 2022, it goes without saying that the world has been pretty disappointed with how Perez has been treated by Red Bull and by Max Verstappen. Many thought that he deserved much more than what he received after helping Verstappen for 2 straight years, but unfortunately the team backstabbed him again and told him directly what would happen if he didn't comply with the rules that were set by the team. At this point, experts have begun wondering if Ricciardo isn't just joining for the reserve role, and could Red Bull drop a bombshell on Checo and replace him with the Aussie? Stick with us to the end to hear what the experts have to say. In Brazil, Perez was given the team order to let Verstappen go ahead of him, and the Dutchman was supposed to pass Leclerc at P4, so he would strip more points away from the Monegasque and help Perez in the P2 fight in the Drivers' Championship. Verstappen was supposed to return the place to Perez if he failed in this quest, which he eventually did. However, the Dutchman had other plans, and he had no intention of letting the Mexican pass him in the closing stages of the race. This sparked enormous debates online about whether Perez deserved to be treated this way, and unfortunately, they didn't end there. Verstappen's mother commented on Instagram about Perez cheating on his wife every night, while the Mexican media went after Verstappen and bashed him for his actions, calling him ungrateful. However, the experts defended Verstappen and called Perez too slow and not competitive enough to receive the P2 spot in the Drivers' Championship. Now, during Abu Dhabi, Perez felt like he was being held up by Verstappen's slow tempo after the Dutchman exited the pit stop and was just around 2 seconds ahead of Perez. According to Perez, Verstappen's slow tempo contributed significantly to Perez's struggles with tyre degradation, forcing him to return to the pit and chase Leclerc for P2. He failed to pass the Monegasque, which meant that Perez lost the battle for P2 in the Drivers' Championship. Now, many fans thought that Perez deserved the kind of help that Verstappen received from him last year at the last race in Abu Dhabi. However, Verstappen felt like this was not fair enough, and one could help but wonder, was Perez's defense last year against Hamilton a fair one? Nevertheless, Verstappen slammed Perez's hopes for P2, adding, "That's quite a tricky call to make. You also don't want to end up. Of course you can possibly block, but I mean, is that fair racing? I think it's not the nicest way going out of the season like that. It looked like Checo was catching him enough to try and actually get a move, but then he lost quite a bit of time with that bit of a fuss between Pierre and Alex. He lost quite a bit of time with that because I was watching that on the screens." While the media was quick to defend Perez, he didn't get the support he needed from his team. Red Bull signed Daniel Ricciardo as a reserve driver for 2023, and while many think that this is a move made out of pity for the Aussie, and a thing that will remember the good old days when Ricciardo was actually winning races with Red Bull, it's far from it. Ricciardo knows how to drive the car better than everybody else, except for Verstappen. On top of that, Perez seems to want more than the number 2 role in the team, something that he gladly accepted back in 2021, but wasn't willing to accept in the first half of the 2022 season. However, Verstappen winning 2 championships, one against a 7-time world champion, does hold some weight for the team, and with that feat itself, Verstappen does have a lot to say in the team's decision. Obviously, the team is not going to jeopardize Verstappen's role as number 1 driver in the team, and one couldn't help but wonder that whoever sits beside Verstappen in Red Bull's garage is going to be doomed with Bottas's destiny in Mercedes. That's why the F1 experts and ex-F1 drivers bash the Mexican for his lack of speed rather than bash Verstappen for his actions. Now, according to Peter Winter, Perez shouldn't have told the team that Max is too slow, because this ignited a spark in the Dutchman and he sped up the tempo, eventually running away from Perez because he didn't want to have more issues with the Mexican driver. Probably a mistake, I think, by Checo to get on the radio on lap 29 and say Max is holding me up, which was like a red rag to a bull, because at that moment, of course, Max immediately started to reduce his lap times and the gap between Max and Checo started to increase. When that message gets out, he thinks, right, this is starting to get serious now, I'm not going to have another issue with Checo. Verstappen also received support from David Coulthard, who's a former Red Bull driver, who added that Perez is the one to blame for himself for the poor result, and he shouldn't expect that Verstappen is supposed to help him just because he did the same thing earlier in the season. After all, this is a sport where the strong eat the weak, which is why Verstappen's decision to not let Perez pass him is not to be judged, as the team already knew that Verstappen wouldn't do such a thing if it were asked of him sometime in the season. When talking about this matter, Coulthard added, "It was an open conversation, there's nothing to be interpreted. The team made a request and the driver denied it. The answer was there before, and someone has knocking again to try to get a different answer. Being consistent in your behavior patterns is a quality. Inconsistency is what you need to watch out for because you don't know what you're dealing with. Checo was out of Formula 1 with no one knocking on his door. Red Bull gave him the opportunity to come back, and a car that's nailed on to win races. He's had a fair crack of the whip to try and beat Max, and he has consistently not delivered on the same level. He's occasionally done so, and I admire the victories he's had. With the signing of Ricciardo as the team's third driver, Perez is reminded of his responsibilities to the team. With that being said, Perez can either play the ultimate wingman game and not expect anything in return, or leave and join a team that he won't be able to achieve such success with, like Red Bull. To be honest, Perez's season was revived by Red Bull, and without the Austrian team, we wouldn't have seen much of the Mexican in 2021. But it seems like the team is done with Perez and his actions to challenge Verstappen as the #1 driver on the grid, which is why they decided to let him know that everybody is replaceable except Verstappen. Damon Hill, the champion from 1996, spoke about this matter, adding that Perez's seat is now more endangered than ever. He thinks that Max can ask the team, or has already asked them, to have a new teammate in the future, and who would be a better choice than the faded version of Ricciardo? It could be quite an interesting one if you think about the problems they have apparently had between Max and Sergio. Let's say the toys go out of the pram and there is some sort of fallout there. Daniel Ricciardo could be in prime position. It's his home and he does owe a lot to Red Bull, so he'll be very keen to be back in that fold. What is it about the prodigal son who returns? He could be in a good position coming back and having learned a lot in other places. It can be that you can improve having been somewhere else than returning to the place you started. Ralf Schumacher, another ex-F1 driver, holds the same opinion, adding that Perez's seat in F1 is far from guaranteed. However, Red Bull also needs to be very careful because Perez was close to accomplishing a mission that even Webber and Vettel weren't able to accomplish, and that is finishing 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship. With Ricciardo and the penalty, as well as the new regulations beginning in 2023, it would be difficult to maintain the lead they had in 2022. Therefore, it's safe to say that the team has had a very interesting period ahead of them, but it's not as interesting and as turbulent as Perez. What do you think will happen with the Mexican? Do you think that he'll lose the starting spot at Red Bull to Ricciardo? Let us know in the comments below.